Testing, testing. What's cooking? Good looking. Hi. Sure, baby. I Sunday today. How are we? What are we up to? What are our thoughts? What are our feelings? Feelings. But I woke up today and I wrote something. Change is not an act of effort, it's a symptom of the effort. I don't know. I was trying to meditate and it kept bothering me, so I wrote it down. And after that, I went and I worked for a bit, for like 4 hours. It's Sunday. But so change. Uh, Fuck me, right? Like it's always a pursuit. Kind of like when you're flustered, when you're looking at yourself and when you're looking at how things are around you. And let's face it, most of the time when we're satisfied, the last thing we want is change. Although that satisfaction doesn't last long because everything else is changing. And I said it in a video a couple of days ago, or it's basically what Marcus Aurelius says, that the universe is change, but life itself is opinion. So maybe that's why I was thinking of change. I don't know. The fun part about it is the fact that how we consider our evolution, maybe, or how we consider the sense of direction and what are the things that kind of like engage with us. And I keep talking about negotiating with yourself because ultimately there's you and there's the things that come out of you. And the things that come out of you are the patterns that have been created before. But the things that you want to come out of you are something, they need to stick. And that's a term that I hear a lot from the people that are like, that I watch when I'm learning code. They discuss the sticky part of code because you learn something, you understand it, and when you go to try it out, it's kind of like, what the fuck am I doing? And for some reason, it feels the same with everything else. Ultimately, anytime we're looking at, I mean, like when we're actively intentional about change, we end up focusing on change. We don't really focus on what could bring change. And the thought behind today, like here, change is not an act of effort, it's the symptom of the effort. But then, like our negotiations and how I would explain it is like, what's the effort? What exactly can I be doing in order for me to kind of like have that change happen, maybe organically, or not be fully resistant to change, right? And I'd imagine that's where flow, as people discuss flow, that's where flow kicks in. Because you enter a state of flow, what's happening is your intention is kind of like setting some vibe, and then that vibe is kind of like sucking you in. And what that's happening, you have to adapt to what you're doing. And the minute the flow finishes, you come out a completely different person. And I've experienced it many times before, but I've only experienced it when I fail or when I admit failure. And anytime I kind of like look at myself and I go like, I did not, this did not go out as planned. I feel like the minute I say that, everything kind of like comes back to a different style of reality, maybe, or a different like deconstruction of reality. And that allows for me to kind of like be very much objectively subjective, and at the same time kind of see the subjectivity behind the objectivity, because ultimately it's always my feelings that are placing me in the position that makes me see things objectively, and it's always my feelings that's making these things a subjective thing to me for me to want to objectively look at them. So it's just like that deadly combination in between these two. But change is not really an active effort, because anytime we're trying to change, effectively what we're doing is we're wasting energy under the banner of change. We're wasting energy under the banner of I mean, like, I want to say progress. It kind of feels like historically, anytime we have an ideology and we're chasing the ideology, we kind of like fulfill everything but the ideology that we're trying to kind of like bring to life. So effectively, if I want to be the man that handles that handles the environment or the reality I want in this world, effectively, the last thing I need to think about is how I could handle that reality. What I really need to think about is the reality, because it's easier for me to be molded by that reality than it is for me to mold myself in the image of the man I want to be. And the best I could do is basically engage with the reality in order for my environment to give and take. And ultimately, I'll have something to take as a back and forth. So, the symptom of this effort, which is the creation of reality, and I think that's the activity, when they say a noble pursuit, it's no longer a pursuit, is it? Because technically you're delusional. But effectively being delusional is what it takes for you to kind of like interact very much objectively with yourself and to listen to yourself in a very subjective manner. Because your delusions are based on feelings and viewpoints and on philosophies and artistic influences and all these kinds of things. But the reality is, when you're engaging with the real world, all of these kind of like don't exist. You're kind of like forced to interact in the most normal way possible. So if we actually do want change, then change is the last thing we should be focusing on or pursuing. It's something that we notice. And if we're judging our change based on how our current behavior / patterns are, then it's perfect, because naturally, how do we change past patterns if not by adapting new things to them? And how can we adapt new things to them without actually behaving in certain ways that amend these patterns, engage with them, disregard them, replace them? Who the fuck knows how? Like, right? Like, we're complex creatures. All these things are kind of like on different levels. And each part of your life requires its own kind of like version of change. Because sometimes you want to change in a more like abrupt way and like fucked up way or masculine way or something. But other times you want to change in a more like kind of like subtle way, like nurturing way, like happy way. Kind of like the balance between like the feminist energy and the masculine energy, I guess, in you. And if we are able to handle things the way they are, or at the very least, if we're able to handle things truthfully the way we want them to be, right? So I think that's how, if you reflect on, if you want people to if you want to be kind, then basically you kind of like, you interact with the people that are least deserving of your kindness, because that's when you truly are kind. When somebody's an asshole and you kind of like act nicely to them, that's when you're actively like working, that's when you're engaging with something completely different than how you would normally do it. And effectively, you interact with your own pattern directly. And then at the very least, at the end of it, that's when we feel a certain sense of like, back then I would have retaliated, I would have been angry, I would have been upset if somebody's being an asshole, for example. But it's apparently I'm becoming kinder, change. For me, for example, while I'm approaching work, back then I would have been frustrated and I would have had 3 extra coffees that wouldn't help with whatever I'm trying to focus on. But now I just decided to take a 5-minute break and come back to work instead of kind of like add more fuel to the fire. A bit of change. It's even like, in a family setting where you normally want to engage and talk and eventually end up frustrated, you find yourself like engaging less, talking less, and feeling less frustrated, effectively changing. It is really in the simplest of things that we can notice them. And these small, I want to say, wins kind of show us the patterns that are succeeding with us. And ultimately, the whole concept of change becomes a reflective point, at the end of the month, you can look at what you're doing or what you've done, and you reflect on the month before that and to see whether you're able to kind of like do something like this or not. And then you'll be able to measure the change, maybe, depending on how scientific you want to be. Or if you're actually catching a flow that's a bit bigger over the course of a year instead of like over daily small snippets of flows. Because like within your work you kind of need direct feedback, but within your own life you could go a week, 2 weeks without feedback. You can allow something to kind of like test itself out, and eventually, like 6 months into the future, you can reflect, and that's when you notice change. Because ultimately, your intention was to change, but your energy was not focused on change itself. It was focused on what was needed for change to happen, for change to become a reality, a dynamic. Change as a dynamic sounds a lot better. I don't know. Change is a symptom of the intention and the effort that you put in. Why the fuck not? My guys, this is a video.